also, though, about students being able to navigate that process. Yes. A lot of students who may have the talent, they either get intimidated or just don't understand how to make contact with someone like you, how to apply, how to, I guess, pester you. You know, people get intimidated, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this part of the world is an emerging kind of area for us to develop, but we have agents in China and we have agents in South Korea and places like that. We need to develop that infrastructure here and the connections again.
How do you see that being able to develop here, being able to cultivate that desire by
I'm just imagining how we can apply everything that Stephen said to the Middle East.
Yes, yeah,
that's pretty intense, to say the least.
That's what I mean. So the homework space that I mentioned earlier is entirely free as well, and so it's a need-blind policy and based on
one step.
Talent. Yeah, and a very small school though at this point.
Is it in English or in Arabic?
No, it's in English. Yeah, and they get visiting professors from all over the world, very established and prominent artists, to come and do courses.
I mean, Myrna, how do you see it being affected, you know, in terms of the diaspora now descending upon Dubai? I think we were talking about the other day, you know, for instance, like you were saying about the I Am Gallery, you know, getting all of their artists out of Syria. Yeah. I mean, that's going to affect their practice, you know, going, you know, decades into the future. You know, where are these artists going?
You know, there's actually a story that we ran in today's Daily about Syria and what's happening with Syria, and the same thing with, you know, Egypt. What's happening to these artists? Where are they going? The latest reports show that there are 1 million Syrians in Lebanon. These are the ones that are accounted for. The ones that are unaccounted, because you can enter Lebanon with just your Syrian ID, so there's no stamp or anything. But I've come to know that the Syrian artists are looking for work. They're looking for representation. And you know, how do you function? I Am Gallery, I'm aware, got their artists out of Syria, got them visas. They went to Beirut, Cairo, and Dubai as well. But again, there's not enough.
There's not an art infrastructure.
No,
I mean, even here in Dubai,
there is no real infrastructure to cover. I mean, it's hard enough to get a residency anywhere. And if you're an artist and all you know is making art, that's even worse. You know, it's even tougher in the Middle East.
Because you can't, to apply for your residency in Dubai, you can't.
There's no profession.
Is not a profession.
It's not a recognized profession yet, and it's not just here. It's elsewhere in the region.
Well, even in the UK,
it's not a recognized profession in the UK actually either.
Yeah.
So
I mean but the country has a history of you know, funding and patronizing the arts through education and so on. We still don't have art schools, but as we have mentioned before, we have organizations which support the arts through various channels. But it's going to take a lot of time, and I think as more time passes, Dubai is increasingly becoming the hub for this. Not Dubai, the Emirates, because everybody is coming here. And
but
because
you know, there's so many plans underway,
and so on, and the plans, of course.
There's so many plans underway, but ultimately the one field I think that they're totally lacking in is still education. I mean, NYU is open to campus, and I think they're hoping at some point to offer an MFA program, but that's still.
But Dana, this is the earlier point. Before we start talking and dreaming about, you know, art education programs, something has to change with us, with our, you know, culture, and accepting that art is a serious profession, whether it's making it, becoming a curator, opening a gallery, or whatever. Abu Dhabi University actually last November, during Abu Dhabi Art, launched a bachelor's degree for art.
In art history or
in fine art.
Oh wow.
With various subsects into, you know, managing a business and so on and so forth. That's a start. That's a start. But more such initiatives need to happen.
Yeah, Tariq Al-Hussein recently moved from the American University of Sharjah to NYU Abu Dhabi to teach visual art.
So it's getting there, but something has to change within us first, I think.
So how your experience as being, you know, of course of Iranian origin, but living so much of your life in London, you know, going through the English system, but now in some ways a lot of your work really does deal with your, you know, your ethnic background. Mm.
education system was that these artists that educated, say, in South Korea, and a lot of the art students in London art schools mainly come from Korea and Japan. And then I would imagine that the Middle Eastern artists are maybe second largest number.
No, Southeast Asia mainly.
Oh, okay.
The other emerging, European obviously,
Okay.
Russian students
Okay.
increasingly,
Russia.
particularly in fashion, and South American, particularly Brazil, is
Okay.
is
So
another emerging
in that-
area of
in that-
interest.
Yeah, in that case, our voices are even the minority of the minority. But I think what's really important when I come across students that come from abroad is they come with not only the gap that you were saying in the language and the culture, but the gap in education, because the students who are educated in the British system, possibly American, or I should say the Western system, they come with a language of how to talk about their art. You know, they're steeped in philosophy and the theory of art, so they can contextualize their work. They're able to read about their own work, you know, how to not only talk about it, how to present it, but how to contextualize it. And I think often students that come from, say, Middle East or South Korea or whatever, they lack that knowledge. So they come to the art school with the kind of like an inability to talk about their art, or to have any knowledge of history of what they're making and how it fits into the. So I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but in my experience, I think that was the first daunting thing for them, to suddenly be faced with having to write essays or to have a knowledge.
It's a big challenge, and not just for, it's for any non-native English-speaking student. We have a lot of support systems, but there is a big challenge around students having to write essays and think about their practice, really, engage with their own practice, think about it, but then write it down, because that is part of getting a degree, whether you like it or not. And so we do a lot of support around that, because what we're finding is that talented students, their degree, and degree is not everything, the level of degree is not everything in the artwork to an art student, but people whose English is a second language are getting substantially lower degrees than native English speaking students, so we need to work on that as well. It's about attainment, I think, as well.
But sorry to join in. Just wanted to say that I think it's I think this is kind of like a problem more than that. I think it's a lack of theory education outside the Western language. Outside the Western education, rather, is that lack of having any knowledge of what really has happened in art history and who's written about it. And if someone comes to art school and they haven't even read Greenberg, they can't make art. You see, art is not just, if they're making it, if you're just making art in the blind, it's just a skill. What you're making is just, what it is. And
Craft.
yeah, it becomes craft. So if you...
Craft plus ideas.
Yes. So if for me, I think in countries like Iran, and that's the problem, they see it as skill because they don't see art within a philosophy structure. Therefore, so when you teach art in a college, I think without that support of the philosophy and the theory, and I was educated in Goldsmith, and it's like the most famous theory-based art school in Europe, I would say, and it's like deeply drenched in it, and we have seminars that last for hours, and it's kind of like completely emotionally draining, because you have to have hours and hours of somebody tearing your ideas apart, and unless you have a real good grounding of why you're doing and what you're making or why you're making it, you're just completely ripped apart. So you just can't go on making it.
It requires a lot of self-expression and a lot of self-confidence in your beliefs, and I think that's a key problem in the way that artists are educated, and not as artists, just as students in school. Is that this, especially in Saudi, which is an education system I'm fairly knowledgeable on, it's all about memorization. It's not about writing a free free thought or writing an essay.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, at all. It's truly a system of memorization of facts and figures, and I think that a key development of an artist is I guess projecting that. I think maybe we'll open it up to the floor if anybody has any questions. And of course, we'll be around after the conclusion of the talk if anybody wants to discuss any of this with us.
Hi, my name is Rumana. I'd like to bring into the conversation another aspect which is not only born from what we can get from the West, it's also contextualizing art within the region we're in, which has extremes. We're based now in Dubai, and there's a focus on obviously business and economy and so on. So how relevant is art within that context, and how relevant is art within the context of sort of torn countries, Syria, even Lebanon, Egypt, Libya, and so on. So understanding how to present the culture of art and creativity within these contexts, not just for the sake of how art in history was perceived, but its importance in actually contributing progressively and positively to both extremes, be it economical or on a humanitarian level.
I completely agree with you. I think that, a lot of times, a criticism I hear of Middle Eastern art from people not from the region is that it's just so political. It's so obsessed with politics.
Oh, that works me up. That
I know, and I'm like, I want to say to them, yes,
No.
well, but it is in some ways. It
Some is, not all of it.
No, of course not, but
Yeah.
some is, and why shouldn't it be? People are talking about their experiences from where they're from and who they are, and in their daily life.
There are a lot of people who think that the best art is politically charged.
Yes.
And and the best art comes out of communities that are dealing with struggle,
Repressed.
because those are the people who need to express themselves.
And I think that the idea of art being a part of a cultural diplomacy is not something new, but it's something that the Middle East is just embracing now. Catherine the Great sent her ambassadors around the world buying the best art from the countries they were in. That's the Hermitage collection. And I think that we see now that with organizations like Edge of Arabia, really promoting Saudi art worldwide, with various museums getting very involved with it in the West, creating the Tate, they have now a Middle Eastern Acquisitions Committee, Latin American Acquisitions Committee, and it's very much an idea of that exchange. And especially now at the Tate, there's the level 2 gallery space, which is promoting relationships with the Tate with small nonprofit institutions. So, a small museum from Peru, Darat El Fanoun from Amman, and they do these shows with the local curators and bring them over to the Tate, and the Tate curators go to them, and they create a program that is very much about that idea of exchange. And I think, of course, more needs to be done, but it is starting, or so we hope.